from a marketing internship to becoming a president in Latin America of one of the largest organizations of the world, the Sony mobile division. Of course, this is just part of Ricardo Junqueira's journey, who today is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Snap Technologies. But this is part of another Evolve Commerce Expert Sessions. Every Thursday, we host an expert session with an incredible expert and leader in the world of global commerce. So in this session, we basically, during the first 30 minutes, we spoke about Ricardo's journey, reaching the highest position at Sony in Latin America, becoming a president. He spoke about, he worked there for almost 20 years. He started there as an intern, but I won't give you any spoilers here because, you got to watch this. Spoke about leadership, spoke about working with the Japanese culture and how incredible that is, and his journey to becoming an entrepreneur, learnings, challenges, and so on and so forth. So you don't want to miss this massive opportunity. But the coolest thing about this session, as always, is that we have members who are also great, but they are aware that there are areas in their lives that they need to learn, and they can count on members or mentors like Ricardo. So make sure you hit the like button, and I see you then. Enjoy. Cheers.
All right. So hello everyone. We're here today for another Evolve Expert Talks, and we are thrilled to host Ricardo Junqueira, who's speaking out of Brazil. And I had the satisfaction to be introduced to Ricardo by Érico, who was one of his pupils, I would say. So Ricardo, I just need to give a shout to our friends over at AirMeet. They have this incredible platform, and they are reinventing the whole online event. So it's a really powerful platform. Thank you, Lalit, who's the founder there, Nipun, who makes this possible. So Ricardo, you have an incredible career as you're an entrepreneur now, and you have built a career which I would say is pretty rare. You spent a long several years in the same company, and you built a successful career over at Sony, reaching one of the highest positions ever. Imagine you became the president for Latin America, Sony Mobile Communications. So, but before we speak about your career as an entrepreneur, who's Ricardo Junqueira? Give us the big picture, and welcome, and thanks for this.
Okay, great. Well, first, Carlos, thank you so much for inviting me, not only to join Evolve, but also to be here and speaking to you guys. It's really a privilege. Thank you so much. I'm the eldest son. I have one brother. He's 2 years younger than me. I'm 49 right now, so he's 47. And he's a long-time executive like myself. So it's probably in the blood of the family. Even though both of my parents, they have nothing to do with executive life. I mean, my dad, he went to medical school and he became a psychoanalyst. And my mom, she took psychology at school, and then she became also a psychoanalyst. So you can imagine how having both parents as psychoanalysts can have some kind of influence on the formation of the person, right?
For sure.
Yeah. I have one daughter. She's 15 years old from my first marriage. I'm in a second marriage. And I'm married to Fernanda. And she runs her own company in the financial market in Brazil, which is also very interesting. So she's also an entrepreneur, and that also had some kind of influence to me, which I can talk a little bit about it later, right?
Awesome, man. Thanks for sharing. Also I think we are all here in our second marriage, happily. So that's a great start. 2 kids on my end. Rafa has what? Rafa, 3?
3 kids now. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. So, so very interesting. And how is it that you started your career at Sony? What's the story there? how did it all happen?
Yeah, it's a bit of an interesting story. I was still in college, and I took public relations in college. I was in my, I think, third or fourth year, and I applied for one position at Sony as an intern. And I went to the very last round. It was between me and another guy who's a big friend of mine. Who works for Electrolux here in Brazil, and they selected him for a marketing position, like a marketing assistant. And but they really liked me. It was a tough decision for them at that time. I was only 23 years old at that time. So like 3 months later, they opened a new position, this time for marketing, also as a marketing assistant, and to be participating in the category of digital cameras. And digital cameras, the category itself was just starting in Brazil, the business. So that was back in 1998, right? So a long time ago.
Yeah.
Those digital cameras with the floppy disk,
Right.
that you could squeeze in like 20 pictures. Imagine 20 pictures. Anyhow, so they selected me, and I started really from the very first position that there was a marketing assistant, and I was really young, and I already spoke English because I was an exchange student. When I was 17, I lived in the US for 1 year as an exchange student. So I had the chance to really learn English, which was critical for me in the beginning of my career. And because of my fluency in English, I had the chance to participate in a few things that a young person in a big company just cannot do it. So after 1 year, I was in Sony, for example. They decided to take me to Japan to be the translator for a big event that was held every year in Japan with the biggest clients globally. So they took like the 10 biggest clients, customers of Sony in Brazil at that time. So, Magazine Luiza, Casas Bahia, the big retailers. And they checked how much it was to do the translation from English to Portuguese, and it was like $10,000. And they said, let's just take the intern with us. It's gonna cost us nothing. And and so I went. Like after 1 year, I joined Sony. I went to Japan to see the new launchings of Sony for the next 3 to 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And I had the chance to be with the top customers of Sony in Brazil at that time. And I was able to do the translation for them. It was really interesting. It was really funny. I had never done this before, but it's just translation. So yeah. So I mean, from the very beginning, because of these kind of small things, and then being in the marketing team, you also get to have a lot of exposure to outside, right? So after I got promoted from assistant to coordinator or something like this, every year I had to go to Japan like twice a year at least to negotiate the new products that would come to Brazil, that would be manufactured in Brazil. So yeah, from really young age, I was really exposed to those kind of situations, and I think that was pivotal. It was critical for me in my career.
That's amazing. I mean, I had a similar experience at Siemens, a German company, and I was an intern there. And I had I mean, my first job at Siemens, I had a boss. I was in the marketing department as well for the energy sector, and she gave me. I had to stamp the contracts. It was like a shit job, but I was there doing the stamps and so on. And eventually I got good at it. And she said, okay, there's a job here and I'm not good at English. I think you can handle this. And it was the happiest day that I had. It was every Friday. I was talking to the guys in Germany, which was where I could use my English to do the rollout of a CRM. So I can relate to your experience there. And it's so interesting, right, Ricardo, when we speak about this. And I was at a hotel the other day in São Paulo, and I think we are very international in that sense. But this is the basic still in Brazil, and people who do make an effort to learn English, right? They can stand out so much in terms of salary because I mean it's a skill that it's still not I would say even well comprehended. That if you speak, you're just going to be so ahead of the market, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's true. I mean, at the same time, nowadays the young kids they get much more exposed to English all the time, right? So they have more chance to learn, at least to understand English. But speaking English is a different story, right? So
Percent.
what I can see is that the young guys. So my wife, she has two kids. Well, kids. I mean, they're 20 and 18. Both of them, they can understand pretty well. They can speak English, but not as fluent as probably people that lived abroad. Anyhow, yeah, it was really important. It was really important. And about your story about the stamp, I had a similar story. I mean, I was literally carrying the coffee tray to serve the directors, everybody. And I tell my team nowadays, because here at Snap we work remotely, right? We don't have a office location. Of course, we meet from time to time, physically meet, but we work online all the time. And I tell them, you're just joining Snap, and you're very lucky because you don't get to carry the coffee tray anywhere because you're working from home.
That's right. That's right. Uh-huh.
Anyhow, okay, so let me go back to a little bit of my story at Sony. So you also mentioned about running CRM, and that was my first promotion at Sony. So I was running this marketing digital camera, and then Walkman, not Walkman at that time, Discman. So portable audio category and digital camera categories for like 3 to 4 years. And then Sony decided that was probably 2002, Sony decided to start direct business with the consumer here in Brazil through e-commerce. And so CRM was under this umbrella also. And that was really
what year? What year are we speaking now? Roughly.
2002.
Oh, two. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, 02. So at that time, you can imagine. I mean, internet in Brazil had started maybe 4 years before. I don't know, 4 or 5 years before, and then e-commerce was something that was just starting. And then for a industry like Sony to start to sell directly to the final consumer, it was something really aggressive and extreme at that time, because our big customers, the big retailers, they never thought they would see us as a competitors, right? At that time. So nowadays it's very common. I mean, any manufacturer, any industry goes straight to the consumer also. But at that time it was really tough. And so we had no e-commerce business in Brazil. We had no telesales. We had no CRM. We had nothing. So that was my really first startup experience inside a big company, but starting from the zero, from the scratch, right? And it was really interesting. So I had to run this bid to hire this e-commerce company, and then the telesales, and I had to learn everything from the scratch, not only myself, but the whole company. And then not only I had to learn, but I had to sell the idea internally. And I was, at that time, I was probably 26, 27, something like this. So still very young. Um, and I think that was my first experience to manage a wider range of stakeholders here in Brazil, in Latin America, because I was reporting to a Latin American head of direct business in Brazil, in Latin America. And he was sitting in Miami. And then also to Japan, right? Because there was a global initiative to do this direct business. So that was my first experience, to communicate and really to sell what you're doing, to explain to people what you're doing, to really understand how your business unit, which is a new one, can help other areas of the company or other business units of the company, and how people can see you in a positive, constructive, and helpful way that they can find themselves relating to you somehow. So I stayed for 3 years as the head of direct business in Brazil, and then after that I took over the position of sales head for Sony Electronics. At everything I'm talking about is Sony Electronics. Sony is a big group, right? So I started in Sony Electronics. I moved to Sony Mobile later on. So I became sales head of Sony Electronics. That's also an interesting story because I was 28, 29, and I never thought about really being in charge of sales. I always thought I was a marketing guy. And of course, once you go up in your career, that doesn't make any difference, right? You have to get other things under your umbrella. So marketing becomes sales, and sales becomes marketing, and then all of a sudden you have other areas under you. But anyhow, I never thought I was a sales guy. But then the head of sales at that time decided to leave Sony and go to a competitor. And then I saw that opening position. My boss, who was the president of Sony Electronics in Brazil at that time, he was in Miami that day. And I remember that, I said, I thought, maybe this is a very good opportunity for me. I mean, why not? To take over the position of sales head. And usually you start in sales and then you grow, you become a salesman, a sales executive, a regional manager, and then you become sales head, right? But I went straight, and then I sent an email to my boss saying the title of this email is "I want this position," and then in the email I explained in bullets why I was ready for that position, why I was the right person for that position. And he replied to me. He said, I was already thinking about it. When I come back to Brazil, let's talk. And that really happened. So I became sales head. I was 29 years old, and I was running a big team, like around 70 to 80 people in Sony Electronics in Brazil. All of them, they were older than me. So that was a really challenging experience that I had to learn a lot.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. So, in terms of dealing with the age challenge, I mean, how did you cope with that? And then we move forward to the part where you became president, so we can talk about the other things as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to be humble, right? The last thing that people want to see is a cocky young kid taking over something. Being young is one thing, being cocky and not being humble is a different story. So that was always my approach. And I think you have to circulate in all levels of everything, always, right? I mean, even though you are head of something, you have to come down. You have to go to to the stores. You have to talk to store people. You have to talk to assistants. You have to talk to everybody, not in a fake way, but in a natural way. To get information. And once you do that, people realize that you're just as human as anybody.
Mhm.
And that makes a huge difference, and that creates a lot of empathy. So I think that's how you deal. I mean, there's no secret sauce, but that's how I dealt, and I've been
Mhm.
dealing even today. So don't talk to just the C-level people. Talk to everybody in a
Mhm.
natural way. Okay, so I stayed as the head of Sony of sales for Sony Electronics for maybe 7-8 years, and at that time I got invited to to go abroad with Sony and to be the head of a couple of different countries. I was invited to be the head of Poland for Sony Electronics as the president of Sony Electronics for Poland and for Ecuador, for those two countries. And especially Poland, when I got invited, I was really thrilled. I mean, I really wanted to go. But I had some personal issues, family issues. So my daughter had just been born. She had some medical certain conditions that we couldn't leave the country. I couldn't leave São Paulo at that time, so I couldn't go. And it was tough. I mean, to become the president of Sony Electronics in Brazil, ideally, I would have to first have an outside or a broad experience as the head, as the president of a smaller operation, a smaller country, 3-4 years, and then come back and then become president of Sony Electronics in Brazil. And then, the best thing that happened was that I got invited to be president of a smaller company, which was Sony Mobile at that time, in Brazil. So I didn't have to leave the country. The Japanese, they were really aware of my family situation, that I couldn't leave the country. So they found a way to promote, to make me to continue to grow in my career, but without having to leave Brazil. So I took over the position of president of Sony Mobile at that time. And Sony Mobile at that time in Brazil had a yearly revenue of like $80 million. It was really a small operation for a multinational company. But then I was put in that position because I was sales head before, and they really wanted to grow in Brazil. That was 2013. That was beginning of 2013, and Brazil was booming. A couple of years later, Brazil started to go down big time, right? But at that time, it was still booming, and I had the opportunity to open one more factory in Brazil for Sony Mobile. So Sony had one factory in Brazil. So everything, all the mobile phones were manufactured in Brazil, and our sales was growing a lot. And then we had to open a second factory. And from a $80 million organization in Brazil, we went up to almost $1 billion
Wow.
in 2.5 years, and that was huge. That was huge, and we started to gain market share here in Brazil. Lots of challenge with profitability, fluctuation of the currency. And then later on, Brazil really started to go down, its economy and everything. So it was a tough challenge, but it was huge growth. And that brought a lot of highlight to Brazil and to myself and to my career, how much we were able to grow at that time. It was really, it was a great moment. And So I was head of Sony Mobile Brazil for 3 years, and then and then I got promoted to be head of Sony Mobile Latin America. That was Sony Mobile in Latin America. It was divided between Brazil. Brazil was one big region, and then the rest of Latin America was another big region. And they decided to combine those two regions into one. So I became head of Sony Latin America, including Brazil. That was in 2016. And then I stayed as the head of Sony Mobile for Latin America for 3 years. So in total, I was president of Sony Mobile for 6 years, first for Brazil and then for Latin America.
Amazing. Ricardo, I think what I'd like to ask you is like, so you reached this level, you became the president of Sony. And I have one question really, which I asked you in private here when we were offline, which is dealing with cultural differences. So that's one question. And then how you made that leap to, you know, to becoming an entrepreneur. What led you to do so? Because in our we have actually 8 community members. I mean, really high level people. Just a few of them, just to give you an idea. So there's Rafa, who's here also with me in the room. He's an entrepreneur. But we have Danilo, who's a top voice in Brazil. He works for an e-com, a well-known e-com agency that was acquired by WPP. My dear wife, she's here as well. She works for the Federal Bureau in Brazil. Dalia, who we did a session with Dalia last week, and she's a brand and retail strategist. Was leading Mondele's their research department for several years. Edilsa has an incredible profile. Was the corporate director at Amazon. Paul, who's a very international guy. Damien as well. I mean, very international people, and many of them here, they are entrepreneurs, or they've been in global companies, and I'm sure that they're very curious about what you've done, right? So I like to open the slots actually for them to interact with you a little earlier. So because then I think we have this this opportunity.
Okay.
I love to do that. And yeah, tell us a little bit about that, becoming the president, the cultural challenges, because I'm very interested in that. A Japanese organization, I'm sure, but of course you had a lot of respect. You were there for a long time, but still, time zones, culture, getting them to understand that things run in a different way in Brazil or Latin America. We have, and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I strongly believe, and that's because of my experience at Sony, that you have to find similarities in terms of value with the mother culture of your company, and in that case is Japan, right? So Sony is a Japanese company, it's a global company, but it's very very Japanese. Not so traditional Japanese company. You find much more traditional ones. So Sony is a bit more global, a bit more open. So in Japan, Sony is seen as a global company. But so one thing is dealing with different cultures, because you are talking to different people all the time. But in the end, it's a Japanese company, and if you yourself you do not see matches between what you believe and the culture that runs the company, I think it's really tough. It's really tough to survive. You're not going to be yourself. So I fell in love with the Japanese culture from the very beginning. And it's a culture, it's a country that I respect as much as I respect my parents. They always put the other person first. The other person is always more important than me. And this is something so different from many other cultures, including our culture here in Brazil and in some countries of Latin America. I mean, we tend to think a lot about ourselves and not in the other.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. So that's about respect, right? And then in the area of respect, there's the trust. And it takes a lot of time for you to gain trust from a Japanese executive or a Japanese person. He may seem that he trusts you because they don't talk much, because they listen a lot, and anything that you say, they go like this.
Yeah.
And you start wondering, I'm doing really great because this guy keeps on going like this. But reality is he's really thinking.
Mhm.
And it takes time for you to really gain the trust. But once you gain trust, that's it. That's solid, right? You don't have to worry too much anymore that somebody's gonna, trip you or is gonna do some politics behind your back. And I mean, of course, that happens anywhere, but it happens much less in a Japanese culture. And so I would struggle a lot with cultures that are not really like that. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, culture is culture, right? Doesn't mean you're mean because you're maybe more competitive, more political. Sometimes you're more straight to the point. Um, but then, trust matters to a certain point. I don't know, but anyhow, so I strongly believe that you are in a global company. You have to really believe and have strong bonds and matches with the core values of that culture. Okay. Having said that, you have to talk to European people, American people, and which I did, and it was really great. And when I moved to Sony Mobile, Sony Mobile was very much European
Mhm.
because it was Sony Ericsson before. Remember, it was a joint venture between Ericsson and Sony, became Sony Ericsson, and then after a few years, Sony decided to buy Ericsson's part, and then it became Sony Mobile. So for the first time when I moved to Sony Mobile, I had a non-Japanese boss, which was maybe no, for sure the best boss that I've had. He was a Dutch guy, and he was living in London at that time, and he was really open, really smart, people oriented, which was something that was not. I mean, Japanese, they're not so people oriented in the way that we understand about people orientation. We like, at least Latin culture, we like to talk, right? We like to give feedback and to listen to feedback and interact and all of that. So the Japanese, they're not so much like that. They're more quiet, so they don't compliment too much. They don't. And then I had the experience to have this one Dutch guy. It was incredible. He was really like a mentor to me. Um, and another thing that I decided to do when I took over the position of president of Sony Mobile in Brazil, for the first time, I raised my hand and I said, I want to have an official coach, not a mentor, a coach, because that's the first time that I'm taking over this level of position, really CEO level, and I felt that, and also because I was going to be involved with so many different areas and so many different people and cultures throughout the world. I felt the necessity, the need to have some kind of help. And in that sense, I was really humbled to, it's funny, right? You get promoted, people trust you, So you become president of a big organization after being the sales head of another big organization. And once you get there, you're the first one to say, hey, I need some help. So they hired me. So this Dutch boss decided to hire me for 10 months. So I had one session per month with a very nice Brazilian coach that, and the main topic of my coaching sessions with this guy was stakeholder management. And stakeholders are stakeholders. You have, so basically what I did was to map the main stakeholders that I had to relate and to connect throughout my time as the head of Sony Mobile in Brazil. And I had people all over the world, right? So I had people in the US, I had people in Europe, I had people in Asia, you know, factory people. I was the head of factory here, also in Brazil. So there was factory people, there was sales people, marketing people, all kinds of different areas and cultures and people. And so it was really interesting because we made a map, we put those names, and we created a kind of CRM system with timings that I would have to talk and themes, what I have to talk to each one of them at what time. So I wouldn't lose time and I wouldn't miss the important opportunities to talk to those people. And that, of course, you know, talking to one, like a German guy is one thing, an American guy is a different story. But inside a company, important thing is who is who and when you have to talk to them and about what, right? So yeah, that's some comments about that. So I think that's on the cultural side. So let me move on to the, you know, how I became an entrepreneur. I think that's also unique, right? A couple of things unique about my career is I spent 20 years in just one company. That's very unique. More and more, right? I mean, nowadays, who could ever imagine, you know, talk to a kid that is, you know, getting out of college nowadays and you're going to spend the rest of your life or the next 20 years in just one company. He's going to laugh at you, right? You're crazy. Anyhow, and so that was one unique thing, right? And another unique thing is that I was really fortunate to know that I was going to leave Sony like 1 year before I actually did. Because Sony globally decided to pull out of maybe 80% of the markets globally with Sony Mobile. So nowadays, Sony Mobile is only present in just a few countries of the world, right? So most of the areas in the world, Sony decided to, you know, it's no longer strategic for us. So we're just going to stay in a few countries. So my area was one of those areas that they decided to pull out. So basically 80% of the countries in the world. And then Sony is a huge company. There's many sister companies like Sony Pictures, Sony Music, PlayStation. And there were many opportunities for me in the Sony group. But I decided after 20 years, I thought maybe that's a big opportunity for me to do something different. So I had to do, you know, the phase out of the whole Latin America operation. I was doing that while my other peers in the other regions of the world, they were doing the very same thing. So 1 year before, I decided that I'm not going to go after any other position in Sony. I'm going to take this opportunity to do this phase out. It's going to be a painful and a difficult experience for me to phase out a business, a whole business unit in a big region. But also it's going to be good in a way that I'll be able to prepare myself for my next move. So 1 year before I left Sony, I already knew I was going to leave. So I spent 1 year really focused on doing the phase out of the operation in Latin America. And then in May 2019, I left Sony. But even though I had 1 year to prepare myself, I was very convinced of two things. First, I want to continue to be an executive. I'm not thinking anything about entrepreneurship or running my own company or opening a startup or nothing like this. That never crossed my mind while I was still in Sony and while I was leading Sony. So that was thing number one. Thing number two is I don't want to go to any competitor of Sony, because if I decided to leave after 20 years, I don't want to go to another competitor to do the same thing, right? So let's do something different. So I wanted to continue as an executive in a different segment, completely different. I don't want to go to consumer electronics anymore. Mm-hmm. Not that I didn't like it. I loved it. I loved Sony. I loved the culture. Great company. Consumer electronics is great. It's dynamic. It's interesting. But I really thought it was time to move on and do something different. And then I really took a few months off and I booked lots of trips and lots of different courses for me. So I went to a 2-week executive course in Stanford, and then I spent almost a month in the Bay Area, and then I took another online course in MIT, and then I went on vacation to Africa, and I took many courses. I took vacation. And I started to change my mind, especially after I spent some time in places like the Bay Area in California, where you start to see different things and different opportunities. So I started to get really interested in running my own business. I thought I had a good age. I mean, good experience. So I was 44. I was 44 at that time. I had 6 years of experience as being the president of a big organization. And I thought, yeah, I want to try to do that. And so first and then I thought, okay, so what am I going to do? I don't think I have any interesting idea to open a startup or anything at all. But then I remember that I had one idea that I've had for a long time. When I was about to go into college, when I was 18, and I had this idea of this ed tech, education tech type of company. And I needed a business partner to come along with me to do the technology side, because we had to create this one app, this one platform. So I went to talk to my current partner here at Snap to invite him to come and join me with my idea in my own company. And he actually convinced me that his idea was much better than my idea, and we should go with his idea and make his idea grow. And that's what we did. So we started Snap in the beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic. And we started with one specific product, which is a software that we developed to help mid and large size companies to do their financial budget planning. We identified at that time that more than 80% of the companies in Brazil, and I think globally is the same way, they use Excel to do all the planning, sales planning, OPEX, CAPEX, everything related to budget. They do in the Excel, and then they send it to their ERPs. And we thought there was a big opportunity to create a system that is already connected to the ERP, that pull all the actual information, what already happened in the, and then what's going to happen next in terms of planning, then you do in our system. So we started like this. So it's a software for mid and large size companies. And then Snap evolved, and the core of the software is the integration with the ERP, right? Yeah. And then we realized that ERPs, they all have their own limitations, right? There's no 100% match between what a company needs in terms of business processes and rules, because companies are different from one another. So there's not 100% match of what a company needs and what the ERP has to offer. ERPs, they are more rigid, right? More square. And so there's always something that you as an executive, you want to do in your company and you cannot do because your ERP doesn't allow you. So then Snap became a software solution company for ERPs. We started to develop small apps or small softwares, most of them fully customized for some kind of pain, for some kind of company that runs SAP or Oracle or any ERP. And then we develop this app, we integrate through APIs, and then you keep your ERP as standard as possible, because that's the best thing you want to do because of future updates. And then, this pain that you have, you actually use our software, our application connected to your ERP. And then, so that's what we became. So now we are a solution provider for companies that have some kind of pain with ERPs. And fortunately, it's most of the companies, they have some kind of pain with their ERPs.
That's very interesting. So it started off with the financial planning and budgeting, and now you found a larger total addressable market in terms of mapping out inefficiencies and then fixing those inefficiencies. That's how I've been pitching you, actually. It's correct, right? I got it right.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Cool.
That's right.
That's amazing. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's really, I try to, because of my experience, I try to mix, the best of my experience as a global leader in a big company and the best of the startup company into one, right? The startups, usually they're very agile, they're very fast, they're very creative, but they don't have much governance. They don't have much planning. They don't care too much about cash, so I decided to do to match those two things into one. And one of the good things about startup, which we learn, is this, as you mentioned, is this possibility of pivoting, right? So you have one theory in your mind, you start doing this, and then all of a sudden you realize that the market is not actually where you're heading to; it's more towards the right side, and you can easily change paths. That's very good. That's very good that you can do, and at something. And then if you ask me, what were the main drivers for you to make your decision to become an entrepreneur? And I think this is one of them, because even though I was the head of Sony Mobile Latin America, I couldn't do many things that I wanted to do, just because it wasn't fully aligned with what in Japan people were thinking. And that's not part of the core strategy of Sony globally and all of that. But then I said, okay, I want to have really full control of where I'm going, what I'm doing, my decisions. That was probably one of the main drivers, right? And another strong driver also was I want to have full control of my career. I want to tell myself, now you're gonna do this, now you're gonna do that. So I think it comes to a time in your life, when in your career, that you're experienced enough and you're confident enough, and you want to have full control. And that was one of the main drivers that drove my decision to do what I'm doing.
That's amazing. Ricardo, we have actually several questions from our dear members here, and I'll start reading them out loud. Please, if you'd like to raise your hand and join the conversation online, by all means, I like doing that as well. But some people are a bit shy, or some people they are on the move, just listening in. But all right, I'll read out the first one from Damien. Damien has a new UX agency, and he's from Poland. Amazing guy, really nice. So his question, my question is, from today's perspective, is there anything you would have done differently in terms of your career building to be in the place that you are now?
Yes. When I was in Sony, I was 100% dedicated to Sony. I wasn't really looking outside. I wasn't looking for other, not only opportunities in my career, but also other things that I could do in parallel to Sony. We come from a time where you have to be 100% dedicated to one thing. And nowadays, that's completely different, right? I mean, it's very much okay for you to do 2, 3, 4 things at the same time. So that's something that I would really do different. I would do much more things than just Sony for 20 years. I would, take more social causes. I would probably have my small business at night with my wife or my brother or my friend in parallel, just a small thing. I would do, more things in parallel. That's basically what I would do differently.
Amazing. Thank you. Lais, she has a question about if you ever have, which I'm sure you have, received other job proposals while in Sony, and which points you did you consider, or you did consider, to stay while you were there?
This strong connection with the culture. What I said in the beginning about trust, right? And that's so important to me. I'm not that kind of person that can really do, lots of politics and the companies that I got invited to go, even though I got, very big offers in terms of compensation, right? Of money. But I felt that what I had at Sony with the strong connection with the company and the culture and the trust, that's really what kept me at Sony. And of course, I mean, if things are happening in your career, if you're progressing, if you're moving on, it's not easy for you to go to a different place because you're being promoted. Things are happening. I was part of a selected group of high potentials in Sony for many, many years. And I took twice courses at Kellogg University with marketing professor Philip Kotler, the master of marketing globally at that time. I twice, and then I went to UCLA once. I went to Tokyo University once. If the big company takes care of you, tells you that you're high potential, we want to invest in you, and you see that, and then you have a strong bond, a strong connection with the culture, it's really hard to leave. At least it was hard for me. I mean, and I have no regrets at all. I'm really happy that I spent 20 years with Sony.
Sweet. Dalia, she's incredible. I'm a fan. So being humble and the ability to listen to others on the ground is spot on attitude. I wanted to ask, though, if you had a mentor moving up the ladder. In my journey, sadly, I had to shape my leadership style the hard way, including working across markets. So,
and the answer is no. the first time that I had a mentor, actually it wasn't a mentor, it was a coach, was the time that I mentioned here when I became president of Sony Mobile Brazil. And then I was the first one to raise my hand and said, I need some help. And then we hired somebody. Before that, the answer is no. And then I think there's something unique about the way I was raised. Then I think it was really critical in the way I am, which, of course, that's very cliche to say that your parents are really part of what you became, of course. But as I said, both of my parents are psychoanalysts, right? And somehow, not because they pushed me, not because they forced me, but because of the day-to-day interaction with them, you create something inside of you that allows you to listen to people, not what they're saying, but what they mean in a natural way. And I think this humbleness also came from my parents. So I think that's something that was really with me in my formation as a person. But I wish I had, that's probably another thing probably I would have done differently. I wish I had more mentors throughout my career. I think that's really key. That's really important. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, and there was another note that, I mean, she was, let's say, I believe, speaking out loud in terms of culture, or writing out loud here, that the toughest people to crack were Russians. She said she had to lead Alpengold and Milka, were her brands there. And I have to admit, like, we have Russians in our community, and it's very, very different and hard to read, at least for my standard sort of people. Like, I had to be very direct with a guy the other day. He took it, but yeah, your opinion on that?
Yes, definitely. And I think hard to read, it's a good way to describe not only the Russians. There are many other nationalities that are hard to read, but they're hard to read for certain nationalities. I mean, they're not hard
Right.
to read for everybody. And yeah, that's very common. And I think it's important that you realize that that's the reason why I like your description of hard to read. Hard to read doesn't mean that people are mean or they have bad intentions or nothing like this. They're just different, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be, but not because of their nationality, because of who they are. They could be not so good intentions. But hard to read is really, when I took the course at Stanford, one of the classes was really about the different cultures and the different nationalities, and then I saw a study at that time that showed how people behaved in terms of communication with others, and with the Japanese I had to learn a lot because, like I said, they don't talk much, and they have awkward meetings where it's just you and another person, you and a Japanese executive, and then all of a sudden he stops talking, and us as Latin guys, Brazilians, it's very awkward for us, the silence, and then we don't stop talking, and that's terrible because for the Japanese people,
It's true.
there's a certain level of information that they need to receive. More than that, forget it. You're gonna mess his mind. Anyhow, yeah, it's so many funny stories about different cultures there.
Yeah. I completely agree. So there's Fabio Andrade. He says he was a member of your team at Sony in 2010 to 2013.
Yeah.
And it was a great pleasure to have this professional experience. So he has some questions for you. The first one, what is the biggest difference between leading an enterprise company and a startup? And what is it like to be responsible for building your own company culture?
Good questions. Yeah, I think the first big difference is that you're really in control. And that is equal to risk, right? So I feel that in a big company, it's less risky in general. You are more protected, you're more controlled in a way. And any decision that you take in a small company, in a startup, it has consequences that are going to come to you, straight to you. So to learn how to, your decision-making process is different in a startup and in a big company. Considering those two things, you know, the side effects and that you have in your decisions are different in a big company and in a small company. And this times the risk has to change the way you have your decision-making process, right? So that was one thing. The other question was?
Well, what's like, you know, so the difference between leading an enterprise company and a startup and building your own culture, right?
Yeah, I mean, building your own culture. It's awesome. It's awesome. And it's amazing how you see, because it's really hard to influence the culture of a big company, right? And it's amazing to see how fast people can absorb, you know, directions, culture, and especially in a small company. I mean, we are, so today we have a team of 15 people, 15, right? Still rather small. And we are all connected in this software called Discord. It's a gaming software. And so we are together even though we are remote, we are together all the time. It's very easy to interact with the people. So when people say it's tough to impose your culture when you are working from home, that depends a lot on how you manage that. And of course, in a smaller company, it's easier. And it's incredible how fast people absorb. It's immediately. You do something, people will understand and they will follow or they will deny it. And you can actually see it very quick. So building your own culture in a small company, you can see the results pretty quick, I think. And you can correct where you're going because of that, because you can see it really quick. And maybe you're not, you know, doing the right thing, so you can correct. That's very unique and interesting.
Thanks. Danilo, he's asking here how to maintain an effective communication between the different Sony companies towards projects that might involve all companies. I don't know how separated was the company groups, but he quote parentheses safe space. This is my biggest challenge right now at WPP. So WPP acquired his company, right? And now, like, they used to have a culture. They were acquired by a larger company. And what I understand here is like feeling safe, kind of like in his job and how to communicate. And there are silos and all of that. It is a challenge. So what's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a Sony take, not my take. But I think it's good for people to hear, to listen to. What Sony learned, and it took more than 10 years, 15 years for Sony to learn, is that it's not because you have many different companies under the same group that they all have to relate and they all have to communicate and they all have to help one another. That was probably one of the reasons why Sony decided to buy Sony Pictures, to create Sony Pictures and then Sony Music, because of the content side. And then once you have the content, you can leverage that on the hardware side. You know, that was probably what people were thinking at that time. And Sony struggled so much to put all those companies together and make one help one another. That at a certain point, and that was exactly when Sony Group globally started to go down and the stock price started to go down. They started to lose value. And then Sony, when they realized that, okay, this company and this company, they really have something in common and we can leverage each other here. But this other one and this other one, forget it. It's different business. When Sony realized that and decided to stop breaking down breaking down silos, when they decided to stop doing this and bringing the best out of the different companies and identifying really which companies can relate to each other and can add value to one another, when they finally realized that, that's when things started to move. So Sony today, when you check the stock price of Sony in the last 5 years or 6 years, is way up there because they decided to stop doing this. So my message is don't take for granted. I mean, don't think that because it's a big group and you have different companies that they all have to talk and leverage, and maybe it's not like this. Maybe it's just not like this.
Brilliant. Well, we have a final question here. Also, to be on time, we are a bit. We've already, a bit beyond time here. So, among the many tips, that's Dilsa. Thanks, Dilsa. Dilsa is a former Amazon, also Gap, incredible experience. Among the many tips and tricks you generously shared, I especially appreciated your call out on the importance of stakeholder management. How did this approach evolve for you as an entrepreneur? I like the word evolve. Evolve.
Yeah. Good question. Well, it actually grew because once you are an entrepreneur, you are connected to many different companies and many different areas. Imagine you're opening your own company. So from developing your own brand strategy, your own brand design and communication, to what's the best fiscal strategy that you're going to have in your business and your country. So I think the concept of managing stakeholders is the same. You have to map who is important and what you have to talk and when you have to talk. The difference is you have to look in a wider way. When you are in a multinational company, you know where to look at, right? I mean, okay, so the head of, factory and then logistics and then sales and marketing and then, customers and peers. And that's a little bit easier to map. When you are an entrepreneur and your business is growing and you're still learning, it's not as easy to map who the people are. So my take is you have to get your eyes even more wide open than before. But the concept is the same. You have to map. You have to think what and when with all of them. Yeah.
Terrific. So with that, I think we are wrapping up another session of the Evolve Commerce Club. First, thank you all who took the time to join us today. Our goal here is to become the place where international business happens in a closed, incredible setting, with incredible people like Ricardo. Ricardo, I have to thank you very much for your time. I really connect with you. I think you're a very likable person, full of energy. So we connect very much in that sense. And you were introduced by Erico, which is a dear friend as well. So, man, thanks for this. I hope you enjoyed as well.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Thank you so much. Same.
Yeah. So thanks, man. And I'll catch you later in the offline. And that was great. That was fantastic.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much for everybody who was here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Just a final remark. Connect with Ricardo on LinkedIn. That's the purpose. Ricardo, maybe if you like to leave your contact information so people can reach out.
Yep. I'll do that. Let me just.
And here on this platform, which is really, really cool. Here I go again. You have like on the upper right-hand corner, like these two avatars where you can fill out your info with LinkedIn and all of that so people can actually go there directly. You see? And,
I can see that.
Yeah. So
yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, do make sure you can all connect on LinkedIn, and that's it. And we are on WhatsApp as well, trying to find a better solution. But for now, that's what's up, and we're gonna soon have a better solution. All right, thank you all. See ya.
Bye bye. See you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.